Hello and welcome to a new video from Byte Analytics. In this video, I will be walking you through what exactly is source control, specifically relating to Power BI, and how you can enable this in an enterprise-wide environment. Let's firstly start with an understanding of what exactly is source control. Source control is a principle which applies to modern application and software development. The concept is that we are able to track changes to our code and data products over time, and we're able to maintain a strong version history in a collaborative environment. Now, for some people, source control might be as simple as keeping a backup copy somewhere on their shared drive or on a SharePoint location. In reality, source control is much more deeper and much more robust than simply keeping a backup copy somewhere. Source control involves making commits and changes in a large, collaborative space and being able to streamline and merge those changes smoothly into your working copy or the central branch in the repo, as it's called. Let's understand some of the benefits of source control. Firstly, source control allows us to track every change made to your files over time. Now imagine working with a PBIX file, which is a single file format, and being able to make changes to that file. In reality, once you've made the change, there might be some internal Azure related tools which allow you to track version history, but it's quite difficult. Now that Power BI has evolved with other file formats, this ability is now much stronger. So with source control, we are able to see a transparent history of all the changes made to our work over time. Source control lets us create a safe and isolated environment for new work. Every time we make a change in Power BI, we can create what are called branches, and these branches are localized versions of your work, specifically relating to a particular work item or a particular experimental piece of development that you're working on. Source control makes collaboration easier by preventing people from overwriting each other's work. Once again, imagine having a semantic model and imagine having 20 Power BI developers working on that semantic model at one time. It's highly likely that someone will accidentally overwrite someone's work, and the chances of losing high quality work are much higher when working in that manner. Source control provides full history so you can review, compare, or even roll back your changes if you're not completely happy with them. This is something inbuilt into source control by default. If you ever wanted to create an experiment for your work, but not really affect the main branch or the central copy, well, source control helps you reduce this risk by giving you a safety net for experiments. Lastly, but not least, source control enables professional workflows like pull requests, code reviews, and approvals all seamlessly through the same environment, and this is something which is used day in, day out for large application development. As Power BI developers and Power BI development itself, we are always slightly lagging in this area, and that's really been down to the leniency of Power BI only having one file format. But over the years, as Power BI has evolved, we are now in a better position to take advantage of source control. And the reality is that we have some catching up to do. But in this video, I will hopefully take you a step closer to becoming more confident with working with source control and Power BI. Let's take a look at some of the tools which are involved in source control for Power BI. First up, we have the Power BI desktop app. This is typically something which always started with a single file format, the PBIX file format. But over time, this has now evolved, and we do have the PBIP file format, which supports segregation between reports and the semantic model, as well as other aspects of the semantic model. As of late, the default file format has become the PBIR format, but in this example, we will be working with the PBIP file format to show you how we can use source control. Visual Studio Code, or VS Code as it's otherwise known, this is an interface for allowing you to work with source control. The interface is between Git and GitHub, which are also involved in the full cycle of being able to work with source control. Git is the software which works under the hood to allow source control to even exist. It is what allows merging locally, creating your branches locally, committing your changes, syncing your changes all up to the central repository. This is really the brains of the source control concept itself. Next up, we have GitHub. This is the online web portal, and this is where you would store your cloud-based repos. A repo is simply short for repository, and this is quite simply a storage space on the cloud somewhere where you can back up your live or production ready copies of your data products. This could be semantic models, reports. In the engineering space, it could even mean data pipelines or anything else. In our case, we'll be sticking to Power BI files. Now, if you are already in an enterprise environment, the chances are these tools will already be available for your use. However, if you're learning this personally on your local computer, then what you would need to do is install each one of these applications separately. There's nothing fancy about the installations. You just need to go for the bare basic setup during the installation. I will put a link out to each one of these applications in the description so you can go ahead and download and install these on your local machine. So, assuming you have installed the relevant applications, that is Power BI, Visual Studio Code, Git, and GitHub, let's start off by looking at GitHub. And this is the online web portal where you would save your repos or your repositories to house your production ready code. So this is my GitHub repo here. This is my account. What you need to do is create yourself an account if you don't already have one. The setup is the same as you would have for any modern application or web portal. You need to provide an email and a form of validation and a password, and you can create your account. So in my GitHub repo here on my account, I can see I've got a couple of repos here already. I have one called PBI source control, but for the sake of the demo, we will create a new repo. So let's go ahead to the repositories at the top here. I've currently got 4, and I'm going to click on new to create a new repo. So this is going to be housed in my Byte Analytics portal here. That is the master area that it's going to save the repo in. And I'm going to call this Power BI source control, simply because I already have a PBI source control and it tells me that Power BI source control is actually available. Let's give it a description here. Repo to store all Power BI artifacts. Let's leave it as that. You can choose the visibility. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to leave it as public here. You can start with a template if you so have one. We're not going to do that. Let's add a README file. Always good practice to do that. We don't need to do anything with git ignore or the license for now. So let's go ahead and create that repo. And here we are, we have our brand new repo, which is going to save or house our Power BI files, and it's called Power BI Source Control. You can see it here, and now this is one of the important steps in setting up your source control, is to have a master folder area, or the repo as it is, and we've created that here. The next thing we need to do is make sure our repo is connected to Visual Studio Code and that we can access our repo through Visual Studio Code. Remember, Visual Studio Code is the interface for working with Git and GitHub, and it is what really manages the orchestration of files and the movement going from your local branches up to the web portal and into the repo here. So let's head over to Visual Studio Code and see how we can access this. Here I am now in Visual Studio Code, and on the landing screen you should see something like this on the main screen. So you have a couple of options here: new file, open file, the ability to clone a Git repository. We're going to look at that in a second here, but before you get too deep into this, there's a couple of things that you need to set up, and those are called extensions. So on the left hand navigation bar here, you see an icon which is the second from the last. It's called extensions. You can hover over that, and if you do, you will see that. Click on that, and you should see a list of extensions which you can install. Now, in order to facilitate the whole source control concept, there are a few extensions which you need to install. In my case, I've already done these, but I will show you which ones they are. So you need to install Azure repos. So if you are working with Azure DevOps, for example, that's another Microsoft-based application which allows you to work with source control, you need to ensure you have installed Azure repos as an extension. The other extension you need to ensure you have is GitHub pull requests. This is something that we'll come on to as we work through source control. The next one is GitHub repositories. So this is what's going to allow you to connect up to your remote repository. And lastly, it's remote repositories. So there are 4 extensions that you need to ensure you have installed within Visual Studio Code. Once again, Azure repos, GitHub pull requests, GitHub repositories, and remote repositories. As an example, if I click on one of these, now, as you can see, I've already got it installed, but in your case, if you don't, you should see an icon here which says install. So for me, I already have them there, and with that, you can install all 4 of those. So let's come back out of here. Let's close this. Let's go ahead now and click on the third icon down, which is source control. And if I click on that, you should see 2 options there, and one of them is to clone a repository. So let's go ahead and click on clone repository, and you should see a little pop-up towards the top in the center of the screen, clone from GitHub. So let's go ahead and click on that. And now what you will see is a list of repos which are available to you. Now, if you remember, just in our GitHub web portal, we created a new repository, completely new and blank, called Power BI Source Control. And what this application, Visual Studio, has now detected is that we can see Power BI Source Control as a repo available to us. So go ahead and click on that there. And it's now going to ask you where you want to save this repo or the content of this repo. So just before I go ahead and select that, let me just explain what's happening here. We are about to create a folder on our local machine, and that folder is going to be synced or connected up to the remote repository in GitHub, the Power BI source control repo that we created. There's going to be a underlying dynamic link between our local machine and that repo, and between the 2 locations, Visual Studio Code is then going to very cleverly manage the synchronization of data artifacts. Any changes, anything new which is added to your reports, anything which is changed, deleted, or any new files which emerge in your local folder is then going to be detected and pushed up, potentially pushed up to the repo if you so wish to do so. So let's go ahead and now select where we want this local folder to be saved. So I already have a folder on my desktop called GitHub repo, and this is where potentially I want to neatly maintain my repos. I already have a folder for PBI source control. What I actually want to do is select this folder for my new repo that we want to save. So select repository destination. And now what is happening is GitHub and Visual Studio Code are now talking to each other to be able to save that folder locally on my machine. So what I can do here, would you like to open this repository? If I say open in a new window, and yes, I trust the authors because it's myself here, you can see my new repo is now appearing in Visual Studio Code. The other thing I'm going to do here is if I head over to Windows Explorer and look in my desktop folder, I can see I have this new folder here now called Power BI Source Control. So that's telling me that the sync between Visual Studio Code and my GitHub remote repo has been successful. If I look inside the folder, for now you will see just a single file, which is the README file. If you remember when we set up our repo on GitHub, this is the very same README file that we set up there. You can see it here, and you can also see it here in the background under Power BI source control. And we only have a .git folder in the background, and that is not directly accessible. So at the moment, there's not a lot of content in this folder, but we're going to change that as we save our Power BI data in here. So the next thing I want to do now is open up my Power BI desktop file. This is going to be the PBIX file. Currently, it should be a PBIX file if you're working with that. And I'm going to open that up so we can start to make changes and save it back into our local folder. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, here we are in my local instance of Power BI. I have the notorious AdventureWorks database open here. This file simply connects out to an Azure SQL database, and it's pulling in AdventureWorks DB data in import mode into this file. That's perhaps of less relevance for what we're trying to demo here. The important thing is that now that we're in Power BI, there's a couple of settings which we need to make sure are switched on in order to enable working with source control. So let's come over here to File, Options and Settings, into Options, and let's head over to the preview features. So just here. And what you need to ensure is that you have Power BI project files. That's the .pbip file format. That option should be enabled. That is a must. And the other two options which you need to enable are the store semantic model using TMDL format, and lastly, store reports using the enhanced metadata format. That is the PBIR format. So these three options are essential for working with source control here. Please ensure you've ticked them and clicked on OK. In some cases, you might need to close and reopen the app, but usually it should be fine. So once you've done that, now let's go ahead and save this. Let's click on Save As, and let's find our repo. And now we're about to save our Power BI PBIX file with the options to save as PBIP file enabled. We're about to save that in our newly created local folder. Remember, this is the folder on our local machine that we created, which syncs up to the remote repo in GitHub. So it's called Power BI source control, So important thing to do here is the save as type. So this time we're not going to save as a PBIX. We want to drop that down and save that as a PBIP file. So let's go ahead and do that. And now that's saved as a PBIP file, let's go over back to our folder to see what has changed in the content. So let's go back into our Power BI source control folder. And what you will now see is we have a couple of different things here. So originally we only had the README file. Now we have our PBIP AdventureWorks file. We also have two new folders. One of them is called the AdventureWorks report, and the other is called the AdventureWorks semantic model. Now you may be wondering why it split this out. Something which you may have noticed is whenever you publish a PBIX file, when you publish the file up to the Power BI service, the default file is automatically split out into a semantic model and a report file. That's something which always happens on the service. So behind the scenes, now that we're working with source control, the PBIP file format now also does the same and separates your report into two folders, semantic model and the report folder. And if you go inside any one of these, you will see further folders. So if I go into PBI, you will see a JSON file there. If I go into the definition, you will see other JSON files here as well. And you can see things like the pages, another JSON file, and reference to each page as well. We're not going to go too deep into that, but the key concept here is that the report is now broken out between a semantic model and the report definition separately. Okay, and with that, now let's head back over to our Visual Studio Code to see what has changed over there. So let's go over to Visual Studio Code, and you can see now under Power BI Source Control, we have now added our report and semantic model files along with the README. So this is now picking up from the local folder, which we have, and this is the perfect setup to now get started with source control. And now if I head over to my source control section, so just on the left here, you'll see I have a new little bubble just pop up there and it says 103. So it's detected some changes. And if I click on that, you will see all the artifacts that it's picked up as a result of having saved that Power BI file as a PBIP file in my local folder. So at the moment, this is the initial snapshot, if you like, of Power BI. There's nothing currently committed up to the remote repo, and for that reason, we're not going to see a difference in the before and after. So if I click on any one of these, we're only going to see one version of the truth. So there's usually a view where you can see the before and after. We'll come on to that as well. But in this case, there's nothing to compare it to. It's the initial commit. So what we're going to do here actually is let's just close this down. We're going to make sure that we put all the changes all the way up to the remote repo. So let's click on the little plus sign here. That's going to stage everything. Now let's come up here and give this a message. So we're going to say initial commit. And let's click on commit. So this is now pushing everything up from my local folder all the way back up to the remote folder, which is the Power BI source control folder in GitHub. And now that that's committed locally, let's sync that back up. So if I click on Save Changes, this action will pull and push commits from and to the origin/main. So what it's telling us here that is everything we've done here, everything that we've committed has been saved. And if we hit the sync changes, it's going to grab anything new from the origin branch, the remote branch, and push back anything new from this side up to the origin branch as well. So we're okay with that. There's nothing which has changed in the origin branch since we created our local copy. So let's go ahead and click on OK. And now that's syncing back up to the remote branch in GitHub. So if you hover over the source control icon now, you will see our little bubble pop up that we had of 103 items or changes that it was tracking. They're no longer there because there's no change left to track back up to the remote repo. So what that means is we've successfully created our initial commit and sync that back up to the remote repo. So everything we do from now on should be essentially tracked within Visual Studio Code. Now that we have our main branch set up and everything is pushed back and synced up to Power BI Source Control, we can see that up here, Power BI Source Control, and we are currently in the main branch. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner there. So what we want to do is mimic a setting or an environment which relates to an enterprise environment working setup as well. So typically in an enterprise environment, what happens is the main branch is your production ready code. You would then typically have other branches come off that, such as dev, test, maybe variations of test. It could be UAT. So let's go ahead and create a dev branch. And this dev branch is what is going to be connected to our Fabric/Power BI workspace. So we're going to walk through the setup here and I'll give you an idea of what goes on. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our dev branch based on the main branch. So ensure you are on the main branch in the bottom left-hand corner. Let's click on main. And now Let's click on Create Branch From. And now let's select the branch that we need to use as our base. In our case, it's the main branch. And now let's give our branch a name. So this is the name of the dev branch. Let's call it dev for simplicity. Press enter. And now we are inside our newly created dev branch. Even though it appears that nothing has actually happened here, we have created a branch based on the main branch. So now let's go over to Power BI in Fabric actually, and let's configure this dev branch to be connected through Git. So let's go over to our workspace. Already in our workspace, I have a workspace dedicated to the AdventureWorks dataset. I've actually called the workspace dev as well. In an enterprise environment, typically this is the setup. You would have dev, UAT or testing, and production as well. And in our case, because the demo is just focused around Git, so we are only going to connect into the dev branch, the movement of reports and data sets from dev to production is actually coordinated through deployment pipelines. So that's out of scope for this video, but certainly for source control, we only need to go as far as the dev branch. So first thing you will notice the workspace itself is empty. So let's go over to Power BI and let's do an initial publish up to our workspace. So we're going to select AdventureWorks Dev. Give it a few seconds. Okay, that's done now. Let's go back to our workspace. And if I refresh this, we should see our semantic model and the report definition. Just like I mentioned before, the report itself gets split out into a semantic model and report layer. So this is ideal. The way the PBIP file works is actually breaks that down for you as well. So we have our report here now, and if I go into that, you should see the last page I have is the sales overview. So that's all good. Let's go back into the workspace and let's configure the Git settings. So into workspace settings, Git integration, let's pick our provider, which is GitHub. And I already have a few accounts connected here. In my case, I need to connect using the Power BI source control account, and that is the correct URL. So let's connect. And now I need to pick the dev branch from the list of branches here. So if you drop down the list and if you move through the branches which are available, you will notice we don't actually see the dev branch as of yet. And the reason for that is our dev branch is still only created locally. It's not actually been pushed or synced back up to our repo, which is Power BI source control. So we're not seeing the dev branch to be able to select it. So the way to do that, let's go back over to Visual Studio, and against our dev branch here in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see a little cloud, and there's a small arrow pointing upwards, and that is our cue to be able to sync that all the way back up. So we don't want to create a pull request yet, and hopefully that's been synced back up to Fabric and our repo. So let's go back over here. Let's just refresh our page. Let's go back into workspace settings, Git integration, select Git, pick our account. Let's try again. And now, sure enough, we see our dev branch. So that's an important part of the puzzle there. A lot of developers, including myself, we do stumble on that piece there. So if we don't see the branch available in Fabric, it's most likely because we haven't yet synced it back up to source control in GitHub. So now that we see our branch there, let's select dev. We have the option to create a Git folder here. This is the folder which Git and Fabric, they will be keeping a watch over if you're ever making changes. So if you want to have a dedicated or a separate folder for that, this is where you would enter it. In our case, we're not going to do that. As with anything, there's numerous ways of setting and configuring your workspaces. So if I was to create a folder and a branch through Fabric, I would automatically get the folder created. But this is working from the opposite end. So in our case, I'm trying to keep the demo quite simple. We're going to go from Visual Studio Code into GitHub and into Fabric. So for this purpose here, we're going to leave this blank. Let's click on Connect and Sync. Okay, that's done, and we have another pop-up here, and it's basically asking us which way do we want to sync. So the options are we can sync the content from this workspace back up to Git, or we can sync the content from Git to this workspace. And as I just mentioned, we're going to go from Git into workspace, so we're going to select this here, and let's just click on sync here. Perfect. So now that our items and Power BI semantic model and report is in sync, we can see that here with the green tick. It's in sync with the repo, and the repo that we have connected it to is the dev branch. So remember, that is the development branch, which is a mirror copy of the main branch. So let's go back over now to Visual Studio Code. So as a developer, what I would be wanting to do is creating a feature branch, and that feature branch would be relating to anything that I want to change inside the report. So as an example, let's assume I want to create a new visual and a new KPI card. So I'm going to come over here and create a new branch. So let's do this again, create new branch from, and this time we're going to base it on dev. So we're going to call this new branch feature sales visual. So let's do this here. And remember, the reason why we're doing this is we are isolating our work and keeping it very, very safe and contained inside this feature branch. And the benefit of that is that we don't interfere or conflict with even the dev branch, let alone the main source control copy, which is Power BI source control. So this is a very, very safe way of experimenting and doing your work. And in a collaborative environment with dozens, if not more developers, this is exactly what they will be doing. They'll be creating feature branches, and inside those feature branches, they will be completing their development and then merging their changes back into the dev branch. So let's do that here. We've created a feature sales visual. Let's hit enter. And now that we're inside this feature sales visual here, let's go over to Power BI and let's create a new page, and let's call this, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to call this the same name as our newly created branch, which is feature sales visual. So this is going to just tie back up to that feature branch just for example purpose. This won't necessarily be the case in reality, so this is just for demo purpose. So let's create a visual using our sales amount measure. And let's base that on geography. So let's pick English country region name. So we have that there. And once again, let's just select our sales amount measure and place that as a card. So let's go and get our favorite KPI card. There we go. So this is our sales visual. I'm happy with that, and let's click on save. Now remember, because in Visual Studio I've been working inside of my feature sales visual, I now have a change to the report. The PBIX file that I've been working with has now detected a change. So I can see that here, and if I go over to source control, I can see some changes have been picked up. So what I need to do here is stage these changes. Let's just click on this page here. So you can see this is the new page which has been created, and you can see it's telling me the display name feature sales visual. That is the page name. Here's the page attributes, the size and width. If I click on the visuals itself, I can see it's using the sales amount measure, and I created two visuals. So this one here is the clustered column chart, and this one here I assume is the card, the KPI card, which you can see just there. So I can relate to those changes, and now what I want to do, I'm going to stage all of these changes, and I'm going to commit these changes. So let's just type in commit. And this is now pushing everything back up to the remote branch in GitHub. The only thing here is at the moment I haven't published this branch back in GitHub. Remember, we created this locally. So now I want this feature sales visual branch to be available in GitHub as well. So in order to do that, I need to click on publish branch. Let's do that. Perfect. So that's been done. I don't need to create a pull request. Let's close this. And now let's head over to GitHub and see what this looks like. So here I am in GitHub now. Remember, this is the online portal where I've got my repo, the main copy, Power BI source control. And I can see as soon as I go into this repo, a message pops up telling me feature sales visual had recent pushes 19 seconds ago, just a few seconds ago. And that is because I actually synced that branch up to source control here in GitHub. So it has detected my local branch. It's been created. It's now available here as well. And what I want to do, I actually want to compare this and create a pull request. And the reason for doing that, I want my changes that I've made in Power BI, I want them to be merged back into the dev branch smoothly and safely. So let's go ahead and click on compare and pull request. And the key thing you want to look out for here is the base and the compare branch. So the base actually needs to be the dev branch. That's where everything needs to go. And the compare branch is our feature sales visual. So I can give this a title, I can give it a description. So I can come in here and say new sales visual and KPI card, just as a bit of a description as to what's happened here. So now if I'm happy with this, I can go ahead and click on create pull request. So GitHub has now gone ahead and done that for me. It's created the pull request, and now there's no conflict. So if you're in a collaborative environment, there could be a likelihood of finding conflicts when working with other developers. In this case, there's no conflicts, it's just myself here. But the idea here is that if there were conflicts, you can actually resolve them in a cleaner manner, and it's not a case of losing any work. It would automatically merge everyone's changes smoothly. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and click on merge pull request. So remember, we're going from our feature sales visual branch into the dev branch again. So we're going to commit into dev from feature sales visual. There's actually a bit of a narrative up here for us to confirm that as well. So let's go ahead and merge pull request. And once again, it gives us an opportunity to double check and commit that. I'm happy with that. So let's confirm the merge. So pull request successfully merged and closed. I have now the ability to delete this branch. So I can delete that either now or later, but I'll probably delete that later just to make sure everything is closed off neatly. So for the moment then, we know that our changes have gone from our local branch up into GitHub, and they have merged back successfully into the dev branch. So the thing to do now is go over to Power BI or the Fabric workspace and see what this looks like. So here I am back in my AdventureWorks dev workspace. Remember, we connected this up to the dev branch. Now, since we've had changes merged back into the dev branch, if I was to now refresh this, in theory, I should be able to see a change being detected. So let's give this a few seconds. And rightfully so. So I can see that there's a couple of changes. Source control has detected some changes. So let's go ahead and click on source control. And it has picked up changes to the semantic model and the report itself. So now I have the ability to hit update all before applying these changes to the Fabric workspace and the report and the semantic model. So let's go ahead and click on update all. Okay, now that's been synced, so let's close that and let's go into the report now and see if it has actually brought in our changes. And as you can see on the left hand side, we have a new page which is our feature sales visual. That was based on our newly created feature branch, and I can see my KPI card and KPI sales by country or region in this case. So that is how we can create a dev branch based on the main branch. We can then go ahead and create a feature branch based on the dev branch. The dev branch would then be connected to our Fabric environment. So let me just go back to the workspace and show you that. So back in workspace settings, under Git integration, you can see that the connected branch is the dev branch. And then we can commit our changes back into GitHub through Visual Studio Code. And then finally, we can create what's called a pull request to merge our changes back into the dev branch. And last but not least, but we can come back into Fabric and then see those changes have been detected, and we have the ability to either apply them or choose not to apply them. So that is an end-to-end workflow of how to work with source control using a real-world example. I hope that was useful for you. So I hope moving forward we are able to adopt this way of working more so in the Power BI domain. As Power BI developers, we probably have a little bit of catching up to do in this domain, specifically with source control, because it's so easy to work with a single PBIX file, maybe send that file across Teams or share it across email, or best case scenario that we do see is that Power BI is stored on SharePoint, which does provide version control to some extent, but it still doesn't help when it comes to collaborative working with a large number of developers. So I hope, as I say, moving forward, we are able to adapt and adopt this collaborative way of working with source control.